of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. First, on Bloomberg, the U.S. and Taiwan reach a trade pact worth billions to lower tariffs and ramp up chip production on U.S. soil. What this means for relations with China. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard standing by with details.
Plus, she won the Nobel Peace Prize, but can she win over President Trump? The Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado spending the day in Washington. Will she leave with more power?
And the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. joins Bloomberg live on Balance of Power ahead. We'll get her reaction to President Trump saying that President Zelensky, not Putin, is the one holding up peace talks. And is the future of NATO at risk?
And housing emergency. A U.S. senator from the battleground state of Michigan checks the president on his plan to lower housing prices. We'll talk to Senator Elissa Slotkin about her new proposal and the issue of affordability in America. She's standing by for us live.
That is where we begin this evening with Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin, who serves on the Armed Services, Homeland Security, Governmental Affairs, Agriculture, and Veterans Affairs committees. It's quite a business card. Also a former CIA analyst who served 3 tours in Iraq alongside the U.S. military. Senator, thank you for joining us this evening on Bloomberg TV and radio. Let us start with your housing bill that begins with having Donald Trump, having the president declare a national housing emergency. Before we get to some of the other details in your bill, have you heard back from the White House on this?
No. Unsurprisingly, I have not heard back from them. But, the president has declared an emergency on pretty much everything else, right? He declared a national security emergency against Canada. So it shouldn't be that hard that we take the issues that are front and center for the American people and declare a national housing emergency.
Well, I know the heart of this is really around cutting red tape and trying to get the permitting moving so home builders can start building. You've got a goal, I believe, of building 4 million new units. The question I have for you is, do we have the labor force to build all these homes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, before this administration, our immigration policy was fundamentally broken. With this administration, we're in a whole other stratosphere. And we'd have to get that right in order to have the full labor force that we needed in order to build 4 million more homes. But we got to start somewhere. And I think all the proposals I've been seeing, whether it's from Democrats or Republicans as of late on housing, are kind of fiddling at the margins. And I just wanted to do something big and bold and talk about this fundamental supply and demand problem we have. We are short 4 million homes.
4 million homes. The president, as you mentioned, has declared a number of emergencies. He's also cut funding to a number of jurisdictions over various issues. This bill would address this with communities that did not cut red tape by doing that very thing, right? You would cancel funding for municipalities who do not follow the order.
Yeah, or just make them so that they couldn't get access to infrastructure funding or transportation funding. If you want big federal dollars, you need to show that you are a pro-growth community. And a lot of our local communities are kind of like, not in my backyard. I don't want to build more. I don't want a manufactured home park. I don't want to build little granny flats on top of our single-family homes. I don't want too many apartment buildings in our downtown. It just doesn't work that way if we want the American dream to actually be there for our kids.
I want to pivot to your years in the CIA. Of course, you have decades of experience there. So let's look at what's happening right now in Iran. Earlier this week, it looked like the U.S. may have some military strikes there. Those could have happened soon. But then the president changing his tune yesterday, saying after threats that the horrific killings had subsided. Do you have any evidence of that? Is there any reason to believe that?
Well, look, it's hard to get information out of Iran on a good day, but especially when the government is trying to shut down the internet and everything. We did hear that the protests were tapering off, that they weren't as, significant in the last couple of days. A couple evenings, we haven't had them. So I don't think that's a miscalculation. We're hearing the same thing. I think it's just interesting that the president was considering yet more military action. He has really become a foreign policy president, and he campaigned about, being the domestic policy guy. But we went back and looked, and he has carried out military action in 9 different places in his first year, 7 countries, 2 oceans, more than any single president in U.S. history. So it's just been interesting to me that we're even having this discussion about another round of strikes against Iran because the guy ran on, not being involved in military entanglements abroad.
What do you then believe would be the best course of action there?
Well, look, I mean, Iran has been a problem since 1979. And as someone who served 3 tours in Iraq and saw friends of mine killed because of Iran, militia activity in Iraq. I mean, that we have had a problem with Iran for a long time. And while I know the strikes against their nuclear facilities were controversial, I supported them. We have a problem with their ballistic missile program. We have a problem with the way they export terrorism. So I'm interested in having a real conversation about those things. And I think the president showing that he's willing to use force certainly changes those negotiations and hopefully makes them more productive.
You know what it's like to be a CIA operative on the ground in a petrol state, Senator. What is happening on the ground right now in Venezuela, where the president himself has confirmed a covert CIA operation is underway? Do we have the ability to bring security to Venezuela that would allow the likes of ExxonMobil and others to go in and start investing?
Yeah, I think as someone, again, who served in Iraq, I mean, it's a lot easier to get into a war than it is to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And it's not like Bush said we were going to be in Iraq for 20 years or Afghanistan for 20 years. It ends up that way because wishful thinking usually guides some of this initial action without a plan for the next day, the day after. Mm-hmm. And I think even in the past couple of weeks, the president has had to pivot and bob and weave on what we were going to do with their oil sector and whether oil executives who are not actually cowboys, who actually think in 20-year time horizons, were they going to want to get into Venezuela? Were they feeling like there was too much risk there? So I don't think the story is over there. I personally don't talk about covert action on television. The president shouldn't either. But I think it's just like early days yet. And I remember the celebrations in Iraq. I remember the celebrations a year ago in Syria. It's a lot harder when you get to like the actual governing part.
Yes, indeed. We've got some lessons potentially coming there, Senator. I want to ask you, as the president has been using the military quite a bit lately and has ordered a series of kinetic actions in his first year in office, about an investigation that is targeting you for a video that you made. And I believe just in the last 24 hours made public that you, like Mark Kelly and some other lawmakers, are being investigated for the video that you made urging members of the military to reject unlawful orders. Just for the sake of our audience, we'll play you a portion of that video. Let's watch and listen.
I'm Senator Elissa Slotkin from Michigan. Last week, U.S. Attorney from the District of Columbia, former Fox host Jeanine Pirro, reached out asking to interview me because of a 90-second video that I filmed in November. This is on top of an FBI inquiry that came in from the Counterterrorism Division late last year. To review the bidding, in November, 6 of us with service and veteran background filmed a video restating the Uniform Code of Military Justice, saying that those in the military have a responsibility to reject illegal orders.
To be clear, this was your response video to the investigation, Senator, and I had to think of Jay Powell when I saw you looking straight into the camera, talking about what many have framed as the weaponization of government and our legal system. Can I ask you, just for starters here, are you seeing proof of illegal orders being issued by the commander-in-chief?
We just had all fall a raft of folks in uniform quietly reaching out to us saying, hey, I'm serving in the Caribbean and I'm just not sure if the things I'm being asked to do are legal. What should I do? Hey, I'm a National Guard officer and I'm being sent to another state. I'm just not sure that I'm going to be in the right position to be like policing and doing these things. I had a lot of static in the system all fall because of what the president was doing. And then since then, we've had all kinds of reports that have come out about, killing survivors in the Caribbean, those kinds of things that do, at least on paper, violate the law. So we had so much static that we made the video, again, quoting current law, Uniform Code of Military Justice, just quoting it. And then the president came out and tweeted and said we should be investigated, we should be arrested, and ultimately hanged. You do that over a dozen times, you shouldn't be surprised when your security situation goes through the roof. And then his political allies at the FBI and the Department of Justice come after us with, a potential investigation. So that's what he's doing. It's a playbook. It's honest to God a playbook. And as a CIA officer, I used to see it in other countries, an authoritarian playbook, that if someone disagrees with you and you don't like it, you call them terrorists, you call them enemies, you weaponize the federal government against them. And this investigation by Jeanine Pirro just happened to come the same week as, Powell, right? So it's sort of a trend. And I think it was just important. I got some legal advice like, hey, just keep quiet, keep your head down, don't talk about this, and hopefully it will just go away. And I just refuse to do that. I think that is never the solution with a bully. And I think the president has effectively cowed our universities, corporations, our legal community, politicians, and in the false belief that that's going to keep them safe. It's not. And so I just felt the need to talk about it openly because I think it's so outside our values as Americans. Freedom of speech is so fundamental to us.
Senator, I know you've just said that you hope that this goes away. If it does not, I'd like to know what your recourse is.
Well, look, you've got interesting things going on. Senator Mark Kelly, who's being investigated on the military side, is now countersuing Secretary Hegseth. I think, look, there's congressional action that we can take from the Judiciary Committee. We're going through the whole laundry list of things that we can do. But ultimately, I think there has to be pushback on these frivolous, politicized lawsuits, or else they're just going to continue, get bigger, and affect a bigger number of people. So we're looking through the toolkit. I'm not going to walk through it on national television, but it's about going on offense, not just playing defense.
Senator, we're looking forward to the next State of the Union address, and we all remember, of course, your Democratic response to the president's address to a joint session of Congress last year. This is said to be the cover of Sports Illustrated, the front of the Wheaties box. Somehow you managed to thread the needle in your speech. Who would you like to see do it this year?
Oh, geez, that would get me in trouble. Honestly, the biggest thing, whoever it is bring some alpha energy to the response, right? We know he's going to talk for 4 hours. We know it's going to be long. Most Americans, peter out and can't watch the whole thing. Just, mine was 10 minutes long. Just give it some punch and just don't roll over and play defense. Go on offense and bring a little alpha energy to the thing.
Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan, thanks so much for being with us.
You bet.
And first on Bloomberg tonight, the U.S. and Taiwan agreeing to a trade agreement that would lower tariffs on goods from Taiwan to 15%. The deal would also ensure that Taiwanese semiconductor companies increase financing for American operations by $500 billion. Here to break it all down for us is Bloomberg's Mike Shepard. Shep, it's so good to have you with us.
Great to be here, Julie.
Curious, what's the difference between this and other accords that we've seen with other nations regarding tariffs?
Well, it's a great question, Julie, because we have seen so many deals come down the pipe from the administration with Europe, with China even, and with Japan and South Korea. In this case, it really centers on one thing, and that is artificial intelligence. Taiwan plays an outsized role in the AI boom, and AI happens to be at the center of President Donald Trump's economic agenda. It also happens to be really at the center of the geopolitical competition between the U.S. and China. So making sure that they had a trade agreement with Taiwan in place to secure not only an agreement on tariffs that puts the rate paid on Taiwanese imports on par with what goods from Japan and South Korea get hit with, but also to ensure that there is domestic investment here in the U.S. and specifically in the semiconductor arena. That is a key piece. And unlike the trade deals that we've talked about with Japan and South Korea, with those, there were still a lot of questions about where's the money going to go and who's going to invest in what. In this, the path is quite clear. It's going to go into chip production here domestically.
Well, that's really interesting, having heard just BAFO results from Taiwan Semi in its earnings report in just the last 24 hours. How much of that business is coming here?
Well, it's a great question, Joe, and it's unclear exactly what the percentage will be, but our reporting indicates that the deal includes a promise from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company to build as many as 4 additional plants here in the U.S. And that's on top of the 6 plants that they've already agreed to build for manufacturing and 2 others for advanced packaging. It's quite a big investment. It would be hundreds of billions of dollars over years, extending into the 2030s. So it would be a big commitment. And TSMC is thinking, look, we need to diversify our geographic locations, in part because of the threat of China. If China were to try to take political control back of the self-governed island, as it is threatened to do, it would really be disruptive to TSMC and the broader global chip supply chain.
Great, Mike. Thank you. Great reporting. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard with us live in Washington. Coming up, President Trump signaling he'll hold off on attacking Iran after being reassured the government would stop killing protesters. We'll discuss with Dana Stroul, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East under the Biden administration, straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Julie Fine. I'm Joe Matthew. Jamie Dimon says there is, quote, absolutely, positively no chance that he will serve one day as Fed chair. Dimon sharing those comments in a sit-down with Bloomberg's David Rubenstein a short time ago. And it comes just as we close out big bank earnings for this season, with Goldman and Morgan Stanley wrapping a week with better than expected results. For details now, we turn to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Their stocks seem to be rewarded handsomely today, Romaine.
They are. I do want to point out, Joe, probably the most illuminating thing out of that Jamie Dimon interview was that he actually has a twin brother named Ted that I never actually knew about. Now, that's neither here nor there when it comes to the broader markets, which actually got their mojo back today. They did close higher, green across the screen, but we should point out the gains at one point looked like they were going to be much more substantial. We saw a lot of selling heading into the closing bell as some of that rotation trade out of large caps and into small caps abated just a tad. Now, the catalyst for the upside today, you alluded to it just before the break there, Joe, with this announcement by Taiwan Semiconductor, announcing its earnings, I should say. But more importantly, it talked a lot about the amount of money that it plans to spend on capital expenditures, saying that that number will be north of $50 billion, more than 25% higher than what it was the previous year. And that appeared to give some investors comfort that all of the nitpicking right now about whether this data center spending that really was the hallmark of 2025 actually had legs heading into 2026. The bank earnings held up as well. We got today names like BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, a few others, all seeming to support this idea here that corporate earnings, economic conditions, and more importantly, the animal spirits that really drove this 3-year bull market certainly have a few more legs left in it. Julie and Joe.
Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, thanks so much for being with us.
Did you know?
And White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt provided this update regarding the unrest in Iran and President Trump's decision not to strike the country after he shared that Tehran would not be killing protesters. Take a listen.
The president and his team have communicated to the Iranian regime that if the killing continues, there will be grave consequences. And the president received a message, as he revealed to all of you and the whole world yesterday, that the killing and the executions will stop.
Joining us now for more insight on the action in the Middle East is Dana Stroul, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East under the Biden administration. She's now Research Director and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk a little bit about what the press secretary just said. And I also want to point out, just a few days ago, the president mulling strikes in Iran yesterday, singing a much different tune. Is there any proof that you've seen or that you've heard that these executions have been halted?
No, and I think there's so much more information that's going to come out in the coming days. And the reason is that the Iranian regime imposed an internet blackout for many days. So we really don't have a granular understanding of what has been happening on the ground inside Iran. The estimates of how many have been killed range from thousands to tens of thousands. And although there are assurances apparently provided by the Iranian regime to President Trump that the executions have stopped, this is a regime that's weak, scared and exposed in front of its people. And the only tools it has left are those of oppression. So I expect we're going to hear much more devastating news in the coming days.
Well, that is troubling, knowing that the president is still looking at multiple military options. We're told, Dana, there's reporting today that the president has decided not to follow through on the options presented to him because his advisors were not able to guarantee that the regime would quickly collapse after an American military strike. There are also concerns that we do not have all the assets required in the region to repel an Iranian retaliation, knowing that the USS Jerry Ford is floating in the Caribbean Sea right now. How do you read the president's decision here? Was that the right move?
Well, I think that the crisis or the conflict has been delayed or deferred, but it's not gone. And one of the real indicators is that yesterday, even though President Trump apparently declined to order military strikes in the last 24 hours, he also ordered the repositioning of a different aircraft carrier from the South China Sea to head toward the Middle East. So an aircraft carrier group is the most powerful signal of American resolve, and it's going to provide the president and the U.S. military many more options in the coming weeks, should he choose to use them.
Does that mean that we should expect strikes 2 or 3 weeks from now when that carrier group arrives?
Well, I think there's a couple of things to consider. The first one is we don't really know the news that's going to come out of Iran in the coming days and weeks about how bad the killing and the regime's oppression and repression was inside the country. Number two, we know that the regime is unprecedentedly weak right now at home, exposed in front of its people, can't stabilize the currency, can't provide electricity, can't stabilize the economy, doesn't have enough water for the majority of the people inside the capital, Tehran. And the regime is exposed abroad. Its proxy network is degraded, its missile program is rolled back, and its nuclear program is rolled back. So when a regime is scared like that, often there can be unpredictable actions that could put the president back in a position where he feels compelled to use force. And finally, we know that in recent weeks, the Israelis have been raising the alarm that the Iranians are rebuilding their missile program after last summer's 12-day war. This was a big area of conversation between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump earlier this year at Mar-a-Lago. And the president said, if the Iranians continue to rebuild their missile program, we're going to have Israel's back in doing more military strikes. So all of those are factors to watch over the coming months.
Another factor, Dana, the New York Times is reporting that actually Benjamin Netanyahu asked the president to delay these strikes. How much influence do you believe that will have?
Well, I think it's very clear that the president really cares about Israel's security and its ability to defend itself. And Israel has this really incredible multiple layered air defense system, and it was able to repel Iran's complex ballistic missile attack last summer. But there also were many U.S. ballistic missile destroyers positioned right off the coast of Israel to support defense during the 12-day war. And again, I think this is a case of the U.S. military posture not being completely set in the theater before the president makes decisions that not only put U.S. military forces at risk, but also those of our allies and partners like Israel and across the Middle East.
Dana, it's great to have you with us and appreciate your insights today. We'll keep tabs on this, and we'd like to have you back. Dana Stroul is former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East in the Biden administration as we count down to the arrival of that carrier group. And coming up, NATO allies are responding to U.S. threats with a new deployment to Greenland. We'll have more details ahead, and President Trump says Ukraine's Zelensky stands in the way of a peace deal, not Putin. We'll discuss the state of negotiations and the state of the war with Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. It's a conversation you'll only hear coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for being with us. The scene on Capitol Hill a short time ago with Maria Corina Machado meeting with congressional leaders. If you're with us on Bloomberg Radio, they did stand for the normal treatment here, took some questions That moment coming just after President Trump met with Venezuelan opposition leader at the White House today as part of her push for greater influence after Nicholas Maduro's ouster. Following the meeting, Machado hailed the meeting as a success and said that Venezuelans count on President Trump for the country's freedom. Joining us now with a view from the administration, Bloomberg's Skylar Woodhouse, at least the view from the White House. It's great to see you, Skylar. We barely knew she was at the White House if it weren't for the president's schedule today. No public event, not even a photograph in front of reporters. What do we make of that?
Exactly. Yeah, today was kind of a mystery around their meeting. We're still waiting to hear from the White House on what exactly that you discussed or how the meeting went. We're trying to get that readout right now from the president. So we're trying to wait on those details. But what we do know and what we've kind of figured out is that Machado presented Trump with her Nobel Peace Prize. Now, we don't know exactly what that means in terms of did the president accept it? Did she offer it to him? Did he wear it? Or so we're trying to sort of parse out those details there. But very interesting that she did present this as she, is trying to, work on her relationship with the president.
Mm-hmm.
What I also find very interesting is the president had other events today, but has yet to speak about this meeting. What do you make of that?
Exactly. I mean, Caroline Leavitt, during the press briefing today, which was around 1:30, said that the meeting was ongoing then. And then later today, the president hosted a professional hockey team. Sorry, I'm not going to get into the details. My hockey knowledge is not great, but he did host a hockey team. But he did not mention the meeting with Machado at all today. And that was supposedly after the meeting. So, we're waiting to see what those details are. But Trump does like to talk, so I was kind of expecting him to at least mention something about the meeting, but he did not provide any details.
Skylar Woodhouse, I'm sure you'll keep us posted on that. Thank you so much. And a stalemate between Denver and the U.S. over Greenland is prompting Europeans to establish a military presence on the Arctic island. Germany, Finland, France, and more NATO partners are showing a united front, with France's President Emmanuel Macron delivering this message earlier today.
La France a décidé de se joindre.
France has decided to join the exercise planned and launched by Denmark in a sovereign and independent manner within the framework of Arctic endurance. A first team of French military personnel is already on site and will be reinforced in the coming days with land, air, and sea forces.
Joining me now here in our Washington bureau with the latest development is Bloomberg's Copenhagen reporter, Sanne Voss. Sanne, thanks so much for being with us. I'd love to hear what your take is on the global reaction to what happened yesterday.
Yeah, so as you're seeing now, European allies are really stepping up their support for Denmark and for Greenland in this case, pledging military personnel and sending people there right at this moment. Now, it's not a lot of people that have arrived in Greenland and will arrive at this point. So at this stage, it's still largely symbolic. They want to show Trump that they're serious about protecting Greenland, reassure him that anything coming from Russia and China, we will be able to deal with it. Now, of course, there might also be a little bit of a signal to Trump. The stakes are high now. We're here. So don't try come and invade Greenland now.
That is a wild concept to think about, a NATO member having to be protected by other NATO members against a NATO member. Following the prime minister meetings yesterday at the White House with the Secretary of State and the Vice President, where do we go from here? When does this working group get busy, and will there be another meeting?
Yeah, so yesterday it was the foreign ministers of Greenland and Denmark that met with Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, and they really sold this meeting as a success. We came out with more than we had hoped for. This working group that will meet already within a few weeks and kind of find a path forward. Now, already today, we've seen a bit of disagreement over what this working group will be doing. Now, Caroline Leavitt said at a press meeting earlier today that this working group will facilitate talks on the acquisition of Greenland. Now, the Danish foreign minister has been out reacting to that, saying that is not true. That is the one red line that we've set. So it just really shows how difficult these talks will be.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like we've made a lot of progress on this week. Bloomberg's Sanne Voss, we thank you so much for your great reporting, and good to have you in Washington this week. President Trump continues to use national security as the main reason why the U.S. needs Greenland. citing that Russia already has a presence in the Arctic Circle. Now, as the war persists between Russia and Ukraine, President Trump saying in an interview with Reuters that he sees Ukrainian President Zelensky as a, quote, key impediment to peace. Joining us now with her reaction to this and for more on the state on the ground, Olha Stefanishyna, Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. Madam Ambassador, it's great to have you back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. The president just days ago had said that he was not happy with Vladimir Putin. What happened?
I think that there's been a number of public statements, but also the days before we heard that President Trump backs up the decision of Senate to vote and pass the bill on sanctions and putting more restrictions on Russia exactly because Russia is not committed to any progress to a dialogue. What I can say that our negotiating teams are keep on working, and as both presidents, President of the United States and President of Ukraine, confirmed that the peace proposal, which is on the table, is 90% agreed. So as it was many times before, Ukraine is working round the clock to pursue any path towards ending the war. And let me also remind one thing, which is an obvious fact. If Russia would withdraw its military force from Ukraine, the war would end next morning. We were attacked 4 years ago almost. My house, my family were attacked with the bombs, and the military invasion started from Russian and Belarus territory. The moment Russian troops are off, the war is over.
Madam Ambassador, I am just struck to think that we could be entering a fifth year of this conflict. And you might have heard our conversation before you joined us talking about President Trump's designs on Greenland and the back and forth that we're seeing now within NATO over this territory. Denmark has said any action against Greenland would mean the end of NATO, and we don't know exactly how this is going to end. I just wonder, does a world without NATO leave Ukraine less secure?
Well, in Ukraine, we joke that we are always happy to welcome NATO joining Ukraine. And, you know, unfortunately, we are not the member of NATO, but we have managed to pursue our own security. As far as I'm aware, Danish foreign minister was happening to be in Washington. He had talks. Both sides have heard each other, and they're about to draw their conclusion and continue the dialogue. We don't think it should be a matter of such drama, and I think there are actual drama happening in Ukraine, while, you know, the casualties among civilians increased 40% since the beginning of 2025, and this is where we can take real effort to stop it from happening.
Madam Ambassador, after President Trump did say that he believes it is President Zelensky standing in the way of peace right now, is there any rush to lessen a reliance on the United States?
Well, I think one thing we managed to accomplish, and I think it's a very serious deliverable throughout 2025, that we have a permanent, regularly, on a daily basis, working groups represented by Rustem Umerov and Kirill Budanov on our side, and Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner on the American side. We have a good dialogue with Secretary of State, with all the team, and with President Trump, and both, I'm sure, President Trump and moreover, President Zelensky are always open to discuss any issue which may arise, any concern, and we have no concern on our side because our commitment is unwavering, and it's our people who are dying, and it's absolutely not possible to consider any option which would speak opposite to Ukraine's willingness to end the war. And it's not something that only President Zelensky communicates. He communicates on behalf of people of Ukraine, and I think that's what really, really matters.
So after hearing those words from the president, what do you believe is the best way to move forward in this relationship?
I think we don't consider any step as something undermining any efforts on any side. Our teams will continue working together, and over the next 2 days, you will see another round of dialogue, and we will be able to have and hear the communication afterwards.
Ambassador, I want to ask you about the state of affairs on the ground. We can talk about politics all day, but our audience is curious to know what's happening inside Ukraine, where I know that you and the Russians have been trading major drone attacks, but most recently you referred to the killings of civilians. Russia's been striking Ukraine's energy grid of late. I just checked, it is 6 degrees right now in Kyiv. Considering the major blackouts that you've seen in the country, are you getting the power back on?
Well, you're rightly saying we're facing the coldest winter in the last decade. And again, when we're saying the war of Russia against Ukraine, we should not forget that this is not only something that's happening on the front line. Over this winter, it has become a war against people, against families and children, against our way of life. As I've said, more than 40% increase of losses among civilians as a result of these attacks. The attacks are directly targeted on the electricity infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and water supplies, meaning just depriving dozens of millions of people from ability to live their life in Ukraine. I think it's nothing short of a terror, and it's far beyond the war. It's the aggression, and it's a terror, and it simply has nothing to do with the Christian values President Putin keep on repeating in his public statements. It has something very, very different.
Ambassador, just lastly, are there any plans for President Zelensky to return to Washington to visit the White House?
I think it's like all of us have already learned that probably I'm the only ambassador of Ukraine in the world who is welcoming President Zelensky every month in the United States, and I'm always on a standby. He's willing to come back. Teams are working on the security guarantees and building the choreography on that. I think the earliest opportunity for presidents to meet would be Davos, and that will pave the way towards the next steps in the calendar.
So you expect a sideline meeting at Davos next week?
Definitely we do.
It's great to have you back, Ambassador. Olha Stefanishyna, Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. We thank you, as always, for the time. Coming up, President Trump pushing Congress to pass his plan to cut health care costs for Americans. We'll play it to our political panel. They're next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. It's good to have you with us. President Trump, as we've told you, wants to cap interest rates on credit cards, a 10% cap. A move considered controversial on Capitol Hill. It hasn't gone over well with a lot of Republicans or the banking industry, something I talked about today with Rob Nichols, president and CEO of the American Bankers Association. Listen. What are you hearing from members of both sides of the aisle? We're hearing Republicans sign on to this.
Actually, well, I've seen what you mentioned Republicans. Yeah. Speaker Johnson, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Chairman French Hill of the House Financial Services Committee, and Chairman Tim Scott of the Senate Banking Committee. All four have said this is really bad policy. I've also seen Democrats make those same points as well. So we've seen, yes, there's one or two people on the Hill who think it's good public policy. The overwhelming majority of folks in both parties on Capitol Hill realize government price caps, government price controls don't work. They won't work here. They haven't worked in the past. And so we're going to continue to make our voice heard that there are other ways to help the American people. This is not a good one.
We're going to play this to Senator Ted Budd a little bit later on. He's got Bank of America, obviously, in his state and is one of the Republicans who did sign on to this. We're speaking to the consumer impact here. What would it mean for the banking business to be capped at 10%?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, for the American people, it would be terrible. So many tens of millions of people would lose their credit cards, so that's not good. And then, obviously, it would impact the banking sector as well. That's a secondary matter. We're more concerned about the broader U.S. economy than the profitability of banks.
Okay. I want your broader view on what's happening here in the banking sector and what some have forecast a golden age. You look at a chart of Goldman Sachs or even some of the money center banks, they look like AI stocks recently. And I know we're grinding through some earnings reporting this week that is putting some noise around the banks. But I'm just wondering what you see in the year ahead when it comes to deregulation, when it comes to crypto, the IPO pipeline. This is Bloomberg, of course, from an institutional standpoint. Is the golden age 2026?
Well, I'd say a couple of things, Joe. Number one, the regulatory direction of travel, the right sizing that the new regulatory executives have been doing is really welcome. So I want to praise the administration for particularly the appointees they put at the Fed, the OCC, and the FDIC, who I think understand the really important role banks play to spur and grow the U.S. economy. So that's number one. Number two, on the M&A side that you alluded to, yes, I think there's going to be more of an openness towards M&A. I don't think every deal gets done, and that's fine. They should all be scrutinized. Sure. Every application should be scrutinized. But I think under the previous administration, there was a reluctance to allow these important partners and these important institutions to get together when there was a geographical or a cultural reason that it made a lot of sense for banks to merge. So I think there's an openness towards M&A, which is great. The regulatory right sizing in the direction of travel is great. And so I do think there's a positive path forward for the U.S. banking sector.
And you can find the full conversation with Rob Nichols, President and CEO of the American Bankers Association, online or on the terminal. So joining us now with their reaction is this evening's political panel, Jonay Wortel, Democratic strategist and partner at ARC Initiatives, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, Senior Vice President at Rock Solutions. Thank you both for being with us. President is hoping to get these credit card caps done. He's hoping to get them done very quickly. What do you think the odds of that are?
I think it's going to be very tough in this economic climate to get those things done very quickly. I think the president has often shown a very aggressive posture here, but I think it remains to be seen. It's in the details, right? And we know that these are oftentimes longer term moves that take time in the markets. And, you know, there's a lot of factors here that I don't think they're counting on to make this happen.
Interesting. This is an idea that might be more closely associated with Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, yet somehow the president has embraced this, and a lot of Republicans. We just talked to Ted Budd today, saying no way. Could there be enough Republicans in the Senate to follow the president on this?
It really doesn't feel that way right now. It feels like this landed flat in the Senate. It feels like there's been some pushback, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think that the perspective that I have from this is that the president is seeing that the marketplace needs to have some adjustment, right? We need to offer more affordability, and so there's got to be something in his calculus or his team's calculus that says that this is a step in the right direction. So it'll be interesting to see, but short term, no way. I mean, there's a lot of unpopularity on this one.
But is there something in the calculus with affordability being such a big word right now when you're thinking about 2026? That had to play into it somewhere.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. This did not come out of, this was not made up. There is definitely someone somewhere in the White House that has decided that this is a pathway forward that would make really good sense.
Well, you add this to a raft of proposals banning institutional buyers from the housing market. He even wants to squash defense contractors when it comes to dividends and stock buybacks. These are not conservative ideas for the most part. How does he get them through Republicans on Capitol Hill?
Well, you said the key word, which is affordability, and that's going to be a buzzword all throughout the remainder of this year. I mean, listen, we're in the 2026 election cycle, the midterm election cycle, where there are a lot of concerns and conversations around the fact that costs are still high for everyday Americans, for families. And, you know, our economy is not in as great of a shape as I'm sure Republicans would like for it to be, as I'm sure President Trump would like for it to be. And so he has to take some very big steps forward in terms of making everyday life affordable for Americans, especially in this election.
I've got a new one for you. This just broke. This just hit the terminal. Gets back to affordability. Everything we talk about in here, in the end, kind of falls under that umbrella. Trump to direct key U.S. grid operator to hold emergency auction. We talk a lot about data centers driving up demand for energy and costs. All of our electricity bills are rising for one reason or another with this enormous demand. The president and U.S. Northeast governors will direct, this is expected to happen tomorrow, the nation's largest grid operator to hold an emergency power auction, putting tech giants on the hook to pay for the construction of a new fleet of power plants. You do a lot of work with high tech. They're good for the money.
This has been so many years in the making. The grid, I mean, I grew up in the Northeast, and I have been working in the energy and communication space for a long time. This is so long past due, and it's very bold for the president to call for the tech companies to come online.
Lower prices?
I mean, I have to believe that that's part of the way that it may be.
Yeah, but this is something that some of these tech companies are going to say, yeah, we're not so psyched about this. And is that something you want in an election year?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to find too many fans here. But I think the reality of the matter is they need to be taking some bold steps on energy policy. And I think that this is a move in the right direction. Trying to get them to foot the bill for it, I don't know if that's really going to be a selling point, and I think that's where he's going to run into a little bit of a
But don't
wall.
forget, too, that grid security is also national security, right? So there is a big piece of this that also goes into not just affordability, but also there's a whole other, and we had the big Verizon shutdown yesterday, all the things that have happened. There's a lot of questions, I think, outside of just energy costs.
This is PJM interconnection, and the administration working with governors whose states are supplied by PJM. They'll be holding a reliability power auction, giving tech companies and hyperscalers a chance to bid on 15-year contracts of new electricity generation. A lot of these tech companies are going to say, you know what, we just signed a deal with a nuclear power plant, or we just cut a deal to have a small nuclear reactor on site. We don't want your grid. This could be very complicated in its execution.
I think it is going to be very complicated. And I think, as with many Trump plans and policies coming out of this administration, the devil's always in the details, right? How we actually make this happen. So I think we're going to hear more about this as we go throughout the year and in the coming weeks. But I think there's going to be a lot of political kind of roadblocks and landmines that he's going to run into trying to actually make this a reality.
Well, another landmine is some states have their own independent power grids. So how does that all play into it? I mean, I live in the state of Texas. We have our own grid. I'm sure you have all heard plenty about it, and it has its own set of problems. But this is not going to affect every state.
But New York City and Wall Street really do depend on the PJM, and they depend on that grid that they're talking about. And that, the way he sees it, is a very important dynamic to make sure is insulated.
Well, that's right. This is Northeast governors that we're talking about here, and we'll learn a lot more about this. You can read about this brand new story on the terminal and online. It's just the latest, as we've been mentioning, in a series of affordability initiatives. They're all going to culminate in a State of the Union address. I asked Elissa Slotkin who should deliver the Democratic response. Do you have somebody in mind? Should it be a senator or a candidate for Senate in a tough race? Should it be Gavin Newsom? Who gets the honor?
I think that's going to be a very interesting question in a lot of Democratic circles in the next
You're not going to
weeks.
give me a name, are you?
I think that, look at two of the biggest prizes for Democrats this year. It's going to be Georgia and it's going to be North Carolina, right? These big Senate
You're looking
seats.
Senate races.
So why not, why not a Raphael Warnock? Why not a John Ossoff? Why not somebody who's really on the front lines of a lot of these conversations on the campaign trail?
Warnock, Ossoff, what do you think?
It's never a successful.
This is a curse for. I know
never
exactly.
a successful role to take. So they should put somebody who's wildly safe. They should put someone in that's wildly safe, that has no issue at all. They should pick someone who's in a safe seat.
Go for a governor, maybe? No?
Possibly,
right.
Yeah.
We're going to find out together. That's what, February 24th, right? State of the Union. Janae Wartell, Lisa Camusa-Miller, great panel, and we appreciate your insights as always. To learn more about the stories you heard about here tonight, check out the Washington Edition newsletter, curated for you on the terminal and online. And we thank you for joining us here on Balance of Power. Alongside Julie Fine, I'm Joe Matthew. Meet you back here tomorrow.
I'll be here.
I hope that you will be too on Bloomberg TV and radio.